Hi.
There you go. There you go.
You do it live. I just wanted to say thank you for having me. And it looks like you had fun this weekend in Vegas.
I did. I had a lot of fun. The AVN Expo was here, and it is a very, very good time, George. I highly recommend it for anybody. All seriousness, I do appreciate you being here and talking with us. And there's a lot to get to. I want to start off by asking you this. Donald Trump was in Las Vegas over the weekend, and one of his VIP guests was a guy by the name of Stuart Rhodes, who is the leader of the Oathkeepers. I wanted to ask you, like, what do you make of the fact that he's surrounding himself with these people and inviting them to a rally in Las Vegas? Is that uncomfortable for you? What are your thoughts on that?
So look, Brian, I want to be fair. I only learned about the Oath Keepers around 2021. I was very unaware that they even existed. And then I actually attended a meeting locally just to understand what they were all about. I mean, I learned a whole lot of how to pickle stuff, paranoia, and that we were going to go into like doomsday preparation. I left the place feeling like, yeesh, some people live like this, but to each their own. And I tend to like want to relate and level with everybody in every way manageable. Per this gentleman being a VIP, I just want to be very sincere with you. Those VIP passes don't necessarily equate to A, President Trump invited him, B, it's usually some local staffer who thinks he's going to do a great thing and giving VIP passes out to somebody. And then that's when you end up with situations like this. Very similar to when Milo Yiannopoulos took Nick Fuentes to Mar-a-Lago without President Trump being aware. So I'm not trying to cover for him. I'm just saying that a lot of these things are organizational things done by staffers who don't know any better. I don't think President Trump really even kind of shares the values of the Oath Keepers. Like, I'm a New York Republican. I kind of feel like I think a lot like him in many ways. Obviously, we differ on some issues. But
George, would you be comfortable if you were in Congress right now, having people like that were charged and convicted of seditious conspiracy, those who physically assaulted police officers on January 6th, which I know you've never defended that type of violence, but these people are being invited to the halls of Congress where you used to work? Would you have been comfortable with that? And are you comfortable with it now?
Look, I made my point very clear. I supported the pardons for the J6ers. I held issue with 12 individuals, right? Tasing a police officer in the neck. Sorry, I'm a back to blue. If I was able to turn the camera and show you, you know what? I'm just going to do it since we're live, right? I keep that right there for a reason. It was a gift to me from a police officer, and I hang it here in my office because I believe in it. I'm not a cop. So I find that troubling. It's not necessarily people that I would associate with. Look, it's the people's house. Criminals go in there every single day. They're called members of Congress. So if we're going to be honest about it, the standard in the halls of Congress have dropped so low historically at this point that, I mean, I wouldn't invite them. And I've invited January 6 families and people who were in DC for their sentencing or whatnot. And I did so because I was duly elected to hear people. I was a representative of Congress, and I do not regret that. I had great conversations with family members and with some people who I personally, Brian, and I told you this, believe were wrongly charged. I mean, if you're standing in a lawn taking videos, is that really interfering with it?
George, sorry to interrupt. I don't disagree with you when it comes to some of those cases, but for me, I have a problem with violent criminals. And as you know, it was more than 12 people who attacked police officers, who committed violent crimes that day. And I guess my question to you is, are you okay with somebody that was not only charged, but convicted of a violent crime, either beating a cop with his own baton, peppering somebody with bear spray, you name it? Are you okay with those individuals? Not the ones that you're talking about that were taking pictures. I get that. Those who committed violent crimes that day, Donald Trump pardoning those people. Are you okay with them being out on the streets today?
Look, I don't condone violence, right? And I think President Trump and any other president have the bully pulpit and the pleasure of doing as they please with their pardon powers. So I'm not going to hold it against him. It's his purview. It's within his. I would have probably thought slightly different. And I do believe he gave commutations to a lot of these people who are more on the violent side, which I think is they did time. In some cases, I think they did enough time. In some cases, I think they didn't. But look, it's not a yes or no question. For me, I'm not comfortable with it in the simple fact of, will they do this again? That is always that question that comes to mind.
Well, yeah. And if they do, would you hold Donald Trump partially responsible?
No, I can't hold President Trump responsible for the actions of other people. Absolutely not. I wouldn't hold that against President Biden, Obama, and so on and so forth.
Understood. But if Donald Trump didn't say that the election was stolen, which, as you know, was not, does January 6th happen? If he doesn't lie months before January 6th and say, I won in a landslide, Joe Biden cheated, the Democrats cheated, do you think those people are there? Does January 6th even happen?
Look, I look at it this way. I was in DC on January 6th. I just wasn't at the Capitol.
Right.
I'm not the riot type guy. I'm non-confrontational. So
Mhm.
I say this. I think that the 2020 elections was contentious. We've had contentious elections in the past. Emotions were really out there. I was at the Ellipse, so I got to see it firsthand. I don't necessarily blame anybody. Nobody is responsible for everybody's own bad judgment. That's how I look at it, right?
Mhm.
And we've had this before. It's not like it's novel. It's never happened to the point that happened on January 6th, but we've become almost very accustomed to riot culture in America. You can go back to 2020 with the George Floyd riots. You can go back to Stonewall. I mean, it really started in Stonewall, right, in New York City. So it's like riots have almost become a way of doing things. I don't necessarily condone it, but look, to each their own. I don't hold anybody accountable for an adult's individual actions. I just think people should answer for their own actions individually and by themselves,
Okay.
and I don't blame it on anyone.
So speaking of that, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you this question. I think a lot of people want to know, and I'm not here to talk about your past and things you have said.
Hey,
Truths or
we can.
well, I know, but I didn't want to do a 20-minute interview rehashing all the other interviews you've done because I think that's a waste of time. But I will ask you this. Are you looking for a pardon from Donald Trump? What are your thoughts on that? A lot of people wanted me to ask you that question.
Oh, look, I think it's a fair question. It's not something that was top of my mind until last week when I was a victim I'm not saying I'm a victim in general, but in a particular court case, I was a victim in the Eastern District of New York, and the judge ruling over it decided to take my letter, my victim impact statement, and slander me and walk all over me. And that really sent a chill down my spine saying, wow, if a judge in a case where I actually help bring a perpetrator to justice is voicing out his bias and opinion against me in such a vitriolic fashion, I'm in trouble. And now definitely exploring trying to seek a pardon from President Trump for sure.
Do you think he will give you one? What do you think your chances are?
I don't know. I just want to be realistic with my expectations. I leave it in the.
Gotcha.
I kind of throw it up to God. I'm like, hey, you do what you think is right, And
I don't know. I don't know exactly what you did criminally or not. I know you've owned to doing some things, and I think you've said some, for lack of a better term, you've said some embellished, stupid things in the past. I think you would be the first one to admit that.
He was the first one to, on national television.
But I also, listen, I'm not defending you, but I will say this. There are a lot of people in Washington, D.C. right now that are in office that have done far worse than anything you have ever done in your life. And I will be the first one to say that. With that being said, though, you did, and I laugh because some of the stuff is ridiculous. You did get a lot of crap for saying you played college volleyball. You went to a university that you didn't go to. I don't want to bring your mom into this because you explained to me how she had lost her life, and I'm very sorry for that. So I don't even want to talk about that. But you did say some things in the past that were a little bit ridiculous. You'd be the first one to admit that, right?
I was the first one to admit it. Yeah, I am.
Yeah.
Always. Look, I say this. I'm not proud of a lot of things, right? I think that's fair to say, and that goes without saying. You live with the consequences of your actions, and I'm going to live with this for the rest of my life. It's not something that's ever going to go away. And it's unfortunate because I'm 36 years old, and I don't know what the hell I was going through, but I learned one thing. Ambition can sometimes be the most dangerous thing over someone's better judgment, and I fell into that trap. And unfortunately,
understood. So I spoke to you a little bit about this off the air because I'll be honest with you, I thought it was kind of funny. You go on Cameo like a Matt Gaetz and others, and listen, there's a lot of money to be made.
I started it.
You did, George. And then Jimmy Kimmel and others are in a way clowning you by paying you to say things to make people laugh. And I'll be the first one to admit I laughed at some of those videos. I thought it was kind of funny. But you have filed a lawsuit, right, against Jimmy Kimmel. Can you explain that and where that is at right now?
Well, here's the deal. It's a federal lawsuit. The judge dismissed it under the guise of fair use. The very same day that it leaked that I got a plea. I'm not going to get into semantics whether she did it because she had bias or not, but that happened, right? We appealed it. It's in the Court of Appeals now in the Second Circuit, which is overseen by Justice Sonia Sotomayor.
Okay.
The guises of the lawsuit is simple. It's a copyright and licensing infringement. He breached contract on Cameo, and he defrauded me in the sense of he signed an agreement for personal use cameos, knowingly that he had the intent to use them for broadcast and for monetizing the videos, which is a completely different agreement. And he did so by creating these stupid, ridiculous texts that I read. I'm thinking people are just trolling friends or whatever. And I'm like, hey, let's go. Turns out it's actually him doing it. So he used a false pretenses to gain a product to then fabricate it to be public fair use, when in reality, he orchestrated the creation of the product. So it's not really fair use. It's the equivalent of me asking you, let me commission a painting of an elephant in a tutu wearing a Republican pin on it, and then buy it from you, post it in some museum, and then criticize you for drawing it. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing. It's not fair use. I entrap you into creating that only to then go make fun of you and mock you. So that's what we're fighting. It's new. It's definite. There's no precedent. So we're trying to create precedent to protect smaller creators from big corporations and bullies like Jimmy Kimmel.
Understood. Give us an update on where that goes. So I know we only have about 5 to 10 more minutes left to go here. I want to talk about Donald Trump and some of his policies. I wanted to get your thoughts today. He's signing an executive order to ban transgenders to serve in the military. I find this repulsive because I believe I don't care what's between your legs, George. If you are willing to risk your life to serve this country and you could pass any test necessary, then I think you should be allowed to serve. And I find this to be just despicable. I wanted to know what your thoughts are on this.
So my understanding is it's not an alt-right ban. It's just a limit from active duty and combat. Right. They don't want to send trans people into combat because there has been reports coming out that were absolutely covered up in the previous administration with the previous Secretary of Defense. And I actually spoke with colleagues who've seen the report now, is that there's a lot of the medications that some of these individuals have to take can cause sense of delusion. And you don't want to send somebody that's vulnerable like that into the battlefield. So they can continue to serve desk jobs back home and serve our country honorably. And I thank them for that. And I'll be the first one to advocate for that. But in the sense of medical professionals and reports that were not really made fully transparent to the American people, I don't think it's in the best interest of us creating a liability sending folks like that into the
so I hear you, but I would say, obviously, that's not for every transgender, not every transgender. Not. Yeah, but he's making a blatant thing saying all transgenders can't serve on the battlefield. So that would be number one. Number two, you have to admit that there are people that are not transgender that are certainly on antidepressants, certainly on other medications that could cause delusion. I just think it's just a blanket thing saying all transgenders, they can't serve in the military. I think that's so despicable.
There's ways to make it better, Brian. I'm not going to argue with you. Like, here's a way to make it argue. I think that nobody that fails to pass a psychiatric evaluation should be on the battlefield.
I think they should do that with the presidency too, but that's another story. But anyway,
well, then we wouldn't have had a couple of presidents serve in recent times. So,
in my opinion, currently the one that's in there right now. But I want to ask you about this because, look, George, he's a 34 count felon. He's a liable sexual abuser. We know this. And I know you disagree with those cases. I understand that. But this is a guy who dodged the military, who's got a ton of women that have accused him of sexual assault or rape. And this is also a man in office today who has a bunch of yes people around him. Look what he's doing with some of these executive orders. He said he would end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours. I knew that wasn't going to happen. He makes all these false promises. He did it in 2016. We're going to build a wall and Mexico's going to pay for it. I'm going to hire a special prosecutor to go after Hillary Clinton. I mean, you have to be willing to at least admit to me that he's not going to be able to fulfill all of his promises.
I mean, look, politicians make a lot of promises. They do best efforts. I was a politician. I made promises. I couldn't fulfill all of them. Obviously, I was cut short. Let's call it that way. But
you were. That's true.
But here's what I'll say. As far as campaign rhetoric, sometimes you just got to pay attention to one thing. Campaign rhetoric is nothing more than campaign rhetoric. And I think we spoke about this when I was on the phone with you, and a lot of politicians are guilty of doing it, right? So I don't want to make this as it's an exclusive issue only for President Trump. I will say this, though. I don't believe he's surrounded by yes men, matter of fact. I think his chief of staff is actually, there's a reason her nickname is the Ice Maiden, is because she's a strong woman. Susie Wiles is really laying the hammer down on making sure that there's no signs of impropriety, and she's doing a fantastic job. I mean, reports are coming out that Elon thought he was going to have an office in the West Wing, and she said, you're in the Eisenhower building. So that's a great obvious show of no, Trump's not he's not up for purchase by anyone just because you're Elon Musk or whoever you are, right? Yeah. And I'm saying that this is really important to point out, because nobody wants to give a fair shake to the chief of staff, who's doing a fantastic job, and she's an incredible, powerful, strong woman. Secondly, as far as Donald Trump goes in sexual assault, here's my opinion. I'm not going to vouch for anybody's Johnson, okay? But I will say this. It's funny how he was always a notable celebrity, powerful, billionaire Donald Trump. And only when he gets involved with politics do all these accusations come running down. Like, why wasn't he already being attacked back then for money?
He was. Well, he was, though, George, because his ex-wife, way before he got into public office or ran for office, accused him of rape. There were other women that have accused him of sexual assault or rape. He's been sued thousands of times for discrimination. Many lawsuits and civil suits paid out because he didn't want black people living in his residencies in New York. You know that. He's had a lot of these scandals happen. Now, maybe it wasn't as public as it is now. I'll give you that. But he certainly had accusations way back then as well, including going into a woman's locker room with a bunch of teenage girls because he owned the pageant. He talked about this on the Howard Stern. So he went in there without permission, watching 16 and 17-year-old girls undressing. I mean, this is just, in my opinion, despicable behavior. George, if that was your daughter, you wouldn't want that to happen. Look, he just goes in there.
Look, I'll put it this way. I look at everybody. We're all humans. We all have flaws, if that's the case here. I don't believe a lot of the things out there about President Trump. I've had the opportunity to engage with him, Brian, and I've met a man that is not just kind, he's humble. I've been to many of his properties throughout the years. His staff loves him, and the majority of them are minorities. I'm saying this literally because I talk to the staff. I'm that one guy that, as a server's coming by with whatever, pig on a blanket, whatever, we're I'm like, you're doing a great job. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. Slip them a $20 bill. Well, you know how that works, right? In service. So I try to be as generous and kind to them, and they love him. I mean, he's the best. We love him. He gives us opportunities. I mean, how can a man that has so many people love him be, on retrospect, through the media, essentially be demonized? I don't buy it. I'm sorry. Look,
but you know that for all the people that love him, there are a lot of people, including members of his own family, and a lot of people that do not like him, including half of his administration that worked for him back when he took office. Half of them that wouldn't even support him. His own vice president, former vice president Mike Pence, who wouldn't even support him. There's a lot of people, George, as you know, that used to be in his inner circle that want absolutely nothing to do with him. So I'm not saying that you're not right in the sense that there are a lot of people that love him, but there are also a lot of people that at one point that were very close to him that hate him. You would agree with that as well.
Well, but let's say that's the truth for me, and I'm pretty sure it could be the truth for you. We have people in times in our lives that we agree with, and then we part ways from. Like, it's not an uncommon thread for a human being to go through a cycle of people in their lives that.
But it is uncommon. I agree with you, George. But it is uncommon for half of somebody's administration, when that person runs again, to not support him, including his former vice president. And a lot of these things he's owned up to. In fact, what I just mentioned, he bragged, George, on the Howard Stern show, sexually going into these locker rooms and bragging about looking at a bunch of teenage girls naked. He bragged about grabbing women by the genitals. A lot of these things he's owned up to, you know. So I understand there are some things that you don't agree with, that you don't believe, but some of the, and I also agree with you when you say not everybody's perfect. We all have our flaws, no doubt. But George, I don't know about you. I've never gone into a woman's locker room intentionally and then bragged about it in a sexual nature. If I went into a locker room accidentally and I saw women undressing, I would get the hell out of there and I would apologize. I wouldn't be bragging about it on a radio show. Isn't this who Donald Trump is?
I mean, look, as a gay man who girls often say, can you come help me with my hair? And they're like naked. I'm like, okay, can you put something on?
George, exactly, because you wouldn't do that, right? And this is a different context. But I mean, look, it is what it is. I want to bring that up before I let you go, George, and I know you got to run, and I appreciate you being here. As you being an openly gay man, most of those in the Republican Party, especially those on the evangelical right, they call you a sinner. They judge you because of your sexuality. I am not one of those people. I don't care what your sexuality is. I don't care what you're attracted to. I want you to be left alone and live your life. You want to marry a guy, go ahead. You want to marry whoever you want to marry, so long as it's legal. Why is it that so many in your party think that you're a sinner for just being gay? I find that disgusting.
Look, I ran as an openly gay Republican in New York's 3rd District. I've never once experienced that. I served in the 118th Congress with 222 other people, and I can say I've never once had anyone discriminate against me. Matter of fact, I've been a Republican my whole life. I've never once had a discrimination against me. Some of the most conservative members of the House Republican Party in the very conservative Freedom Caucus were some of my best friends and remain some of my best friends. I don't think that matters. I think it's about respecting the institutions and traditions. And here's what I say, Brian. The biggest issue we have in our country is that we allowed government to overstep the church by simply allowing marriage to become the business of the government, when in fact, we used to issue civil unions. That's why I'm an open critic of marriage, heterosexual, homosexual, being conducted by the government. I think those should go back to being what they used to be, civil union statements and civil union agreements, and marriage goes back to the church. I think it's about respecting tradition, and there's nothing wrong. Everybody should be afforded equal rights. So because the government did make marriage its business and gays and heterosexual people pay taxes equally, we all have to benefit of the same benefits. And that's simple. And I've made that argument. And a lot of my very conservative colleagues said, you have a fantastic point. We screwed up. We should have tackled this from a different angle. And it wouldn't have created hate or vitriol or everything you've seen, Brian, right? Yeah, look, here's literally what I pray for and what I look forward to in this country. Can we all just find common ground in the 70% center of what we all agree on and stop allowing the 30% in either sides of our fringes to control the narrative? It is so much more productive to go in the middle. That's how I look at it.
Understood. George, I know you got to run. A couple of fun questions, I guess. Who is your least favorite person that you were forced to work with in Congress when you were there?
Oh, my God. Nicholas Lalota, the congressman from New York's 1st District. He's absolutely ghastly, a horrible person, god-awful. And I mean, quite hard on the eyes, too, but just saying, like, a very, very, very unpleasant person to work with. I couldn't put words to describe how difficult it is.
Most two-faced person that is the opposite behind closed doors and completely different in front of a camera. Who would that be?
Every single one of them. But okay, hold on. Okay,
that I believe.
Most two-faced person, Jamie Raskin. I love Jamie, and this is not a dig at Jamie, but I'm just saying you're so nice to me behind the camera, and you give me motivational speeches and quotes, and you give me nice little text messages. Camera turns on, George Santos a disgrace. I'm like, what the hell happened to the comeback kid comment from like 20 minutes ago? So, I mean, look, it's politics, right? But if I'm really going to say two-faced, Congresswoman Lisa McClain from Michigan. She's now the secretary of the conference. And she straight up told me that she thought the expulsion vote was gibberish, was garbage, that no due process. And then she voted to expel me.
That is two-faced. I will give you that, George. Well, listen, I do appreciate you taking the time to come on. I'd love to do this again sometime down the road.
Absolutely. Love to have you on, Brian.
And I appreciate your candidacy. I know you've made your mistakes in the past, but I will say this again. There are people that have done far worse than you that are representing their constituents right now in office. And, you know, I think there are a lot of other people out there that are far more dangerous to people than people might think you are. So I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate your candidacy and love to have you on again down the road, George. And maybe I can get a free cameo one of these days.
You know what? I'll give you the cameo. Just send me what you want. And lastly, I'll come back on, and I'm going to come on until I make you concede that Donald Trump's great for this country. How about that?
My God, George. I don't.
Policies are fantastic, Brian.
I think there's no. We'll talk about that next time. There's a better chance that I win the lottery, but you know,
hey, I'm very persuasive.
George, I appreciate your time, my friend. I know you got to get going, but thank you so much, George, and we'll talk soon. Okay.
Thank you, Brian. Take care.